Emily Carter did not plan to leave her apartment that night, but the silence inside her small Portland living room felt heavier than the clouds outside, and the quiet pressed against her chest until she could no longer sit still, so she pulled on a coat, ignored the unread messages on her phone, and stepped into the cool night air with the simple idea of walking until her thoughts slowed down, choosing Riverside Park because it was close and familiar yet distant enough from her recent memories. And as she walked, the streets were nearly empty, storefront lights dim, cars rare, the city feeling paused as if holding its breath with her, and she noticed how the night sharpened everything, the sound of her footsteps, the smell of wet leaves, the ache in her heart that came from a breakup she kept telling herself she was over but clearly wasn't. And when she reached the park in trance, she hesitated for a moment because it felt strange to enter such a quiet place alone after dark, but something pulled her forward, a need to keep moving, to not go back to the walls that knew her sadness too well, and the park greeted her with soft lamplight and long shadows stretching across the path, trees standing like silent witnesses, the pond barely visible except for faint reflections of the moon, and she walked fast at first, hands in her pockets, head down, trying not to think, until she noticed a figure ahead sitting on a bench near the water, which slowed her steps because the park was otherwise empty, and her first thought was to turn around, but then she saw the man was elderly, sitting upright with calm patience, gently tossing small pieces of bread toward the dark water as if the ducks could still see him, and there was nothing threatening about him, only a quiet presence that felt oddly comforting, and as Emily passed she felt his eyes lift, not sharp or curious but warm, and he smiled at her in a way that carried no expectation, no demand, just a soft acknowledgement. And something in that simple gesture cracked open a place in her chest she didn't know was sealed, because lately people either looked through her or at her with questions she was too tired to answer, and without planning to she slowed, then stopped, turning slightly as if the night itself had nudged her, and the man spoke first, his voice steady and kind, saying it was a beautiful night, and she answered before thinking, agreeing, surprised by how easy it felt to speak, and in that brief exchange the park seemed less empty, the darkness less heavy, and Emily realized that this walk, meant only to escape her own thoughts, had quietly shifted into something else entirely, something she could not yet name but already felt would stay with her long after the night ended. Emily stood beside the bench longer than she expected, the night air brushing past her face as if urging her to stay, and when the elderly man shifted slightly to make space without asking, she sat down, surprised at herself for not overthinking it, and the bench felt cold but steady, grounding her, and the man introduced himself as Henry Whitman with a polite nod, his voice calm and clear, the kind that carried years of patience, and Emily told him her name, keeping it simple, unsure why she felt safe sharing even that much, and their talk began in small steps, moving quickly yet gently, like two people who had waited a long time to be heard, discussing the park, the way it changed after sunset, how nights stripped life down to its honest parts, and Henry spoke with care, choosing words slowly but never dragging them out, telling her he came to the park often at night because the noise of the day made it hard to think, and Emily admitted she walked because staying still hurt more than moving, and the truth of that surprised her as it left her mouth, and instead of reacting with pity or advice, Henry simply nodded as if he understood exactly what she meant, which made her chest tighten in a way that felt close to relief, and the conversation moved fast from small talk to meaning without effort, as if the dark had removed the usual walls people built, and Emily found herself sharing how her long relationship had ended quietly, not with shouting or betrayal, but with distance and tired love, the kind that fades without warning, and she spoke without tears, without drama, just facts, yet each word carried weight, and Henry listened fully, his body turned toward her, his eyes focused but gentle, and when she finished he did not rush to speak, letting the silence settle, a silence that did not judge, and when he did respond he said something simple, that some endings hurt more because no one is at fault, and that thought struck Emily deeply because it named the pain she had not been able to explain, and she looked at him then, really looked, noticing the lines on his face that spoke of time rather than hardship, his neat scarf, his steady hands, and she sensed that he carried his own history without needing to display it, and as if reading her curiosity, Henry shared that he had once been a teacher, that words had mattered to him his whole life, that listening was the most important lesson he ever learned, and Emily laughed softly at that, surprised again by how natural it felt. And the night continued around them unnoticed as minutes slipped into an hour, the pond dark and still, the lamps humming quietly, and their talk moved through memories and feelings without slowing, touching on loneliness, on how people feared it but rarely admitted it, and Emily confessed she felt invisible since her breakup, like the world kept moving while she stood still, and Henry answered that invisibility often came when someone had spent too long being seen only through another person, and that healing meant learning to stand alone again. And his words were not sharp or heavy, just clear, and Emily felt something inside her shift, not fixed, but understood, and she realized this was not a strange meeting anymore but a meaningful one, and when she finally stood to leave, feeling the late hour settle in her bones, she felt both lighter and unsure, because she did not want the moment to end, yet knew it had to, and Henry stood as well, wishing her a safe walk home, his smile warm but restrained. And as she walked away she felt the pull of turning back, knowing that this brief connection, built only on words and shared understanding, had already changed the night into something she would carry with her, and she sensed, without proof, that this would not be there. Last conversation. Emily returned to the park the next night without overthinking it, her steps quicker, her heart oddly alert, and she found Henry already there, standing near the pond under a dim lamp, as if the place itself remembered him. And when he saw her his smile carried quiet surprise, not excitement but recognition, and they walked together this time instead of sitting, moving along the path while the night wrapped around them, and Henry began to talk, not slowly, not carefully, but honestly, as if something inside him had decided it was time, and he told her about Margaret, his wife, his partner, his constant for 40 years, explaining how they met young, built a life through ordinary days, shared small habits that became sacred, and Emily listened closely as his words flowed without pause, describing love not as passion but as choice, patience, laughter after long days, forgiveness after misunderstandings, and he spoke of loss with clarity rather than pain, saying grief did not always shout but often whispered when least expected, and he explained how after Margaret passed the house felt too large, time felt loose, and nights became the hardest because memory worked best in the dark. And Emily felt every sentence land inside her, not because she shared his story, but because she understood the shape of his longing. And as they stopped near a bench Henry explained that this park was where he and Margaret used to walk after dinner, planning nothing, just being together, and coming here now helped him feel close without breaking apart, and Emily felt tears rise but stayed quiet, letting him speak, and he told her that love never truly leaves, it only changes form, and that some connections were meant to heal rather than last. And as he said that he looked at her with gentle knowing, not romantic, not distant, but human. And Emily realized that what she felt was not attraction in the usual sense but a deep emotional pull, a feeling of being seen by someone who asked nothing from her. And she shared then how afraid she was of starting over, how the idea of opening her heart again felt exhausting, and Henry answered quickly, telling her that fear meant she still cared, and caring was not weakness, it was proof of life, and they sat down together, shoulders close but not touching, watching the water ripple softly. And the night seemed to pause for them, and Henry spoke about aging, about how time taught him what mattered and stripped away what didn't, how regret faded but love stayed sharp, and Emily felt her own pain shift, not disappear, but settle into something softer. And when she finally looked at him again she saw not an old man but a person shaped by love and loss who still chose connection, and that realization stayed with her. And when it was time to leave Henry reached into his coat and handed her a small folded paper with a quote written in neat handwriting about walking forward even when the path felt unclear, and Emily accepted it like a gift, understanding that this meeting was not meant to turn into something else, but was complete as it was. And as they stood and said goodnight there was no promise of tomorrow, no spoken plan, just a shared look that carried respect and quiet care. And as Emily walked home she felt changed, not because she had fallen in love, but because she had been reminded that love existed in many forms, and that sometimes the most powerful connections were brief, honest, and perfectly timed. Emily kept returning to Riverside Park after that night, sometimes without thinking, sometimes because her heart felt restless again. And each visit carried a quiet hope, not desperate but open, and on some evenings Henry was there, sitting on the same bench, walking the same path, and they spoke as if no time had passed, never rushing, never holding back, sharing thoughts about life, change, regret, and acceptance, and their talks moved fast and deep, skipping small talk, because they both understood time differently now, and there was no confusion about what they were to each other, no blurred lines, only connection built on honesty and care. And then one night Emily arrived and the bench was empty, the lamp glowing alone, and she waited longer than usual, watching the path, listening to the wind, but Henry did not appear, and she felt a soft disappointment but not panic, trusting his reasons, and she came back the next night, and the next, and still he was gone, and on the fourth evening she noticed a folded note placed carefully on the bench where he always sat. And her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, reading his words that thanked her for listening, for reminding him the world was still kind, and encouraged her to keep walking forward, to keep loving without fear, and the message felt complete, like a goodbye wrapped in gratitude, and Emily sat there for a long time, letting the meaning settle, realizing he had given her something lasting without staying, and as weeks passed she stopped searching for him, not out of forgetting but understanding, and slowly her life shifted, she slept better, smiled more, took longer walks in daylight, spoke more openly with friends, and the ache of her past love softened into memory, and years later, walking through the same park on a warm evening, Emily felt calm instead of lonely, grateful instead of empty, and she understood that Henry had not been a romance but a turning point, a quiet guide who helped her see herself again, and as she passed the bench she smiled, knowing some people enter our lives briefly not to stay, but to change us, and that realization felt like love in its purest form.